before we get started that that's an incredibly brave movie to make, both because you go into such a personal journey of your own in front of everybody, but also people don't stand up after dinner and say, hey, let's go see a movie where people talk about losing someone they really love. And so to go out and spend and commit so much of your life to a movie that people are afraid to go see potentially for what it could stir up in themselves takes a lot of courage. And one of the things that qualifies me to be on this panel is I also, about a year ago, lost a girlfriend untimely. And it wasn't something I wanted to talk about until I saw this movie. And I started to get language around what I was going through. And so I want to thank you for that. And just each of you, for those who don't know, Kathy and Amy, after losing their son Dan, did a film called Dying to Tell a Story, which was very much about going back and finding out why their son and brother had put himself into a situation where he was risking his life to tell a story. And you saw the trailer for Johnny Physical Lives. And so right in the middle of going through that process is Joshua. And then we have Andrew taking us through a real deep exploration, not only of his own, but of others who've lost people out of turn. So each of you has taken, where I didn't want to go into it at all, each of you decided to go into it in a storytelling way. And I'd be curious to find out what, in the process of going through that story, helped you or didn't help you with sort of situating a loss in your own life.
Thank you for what you said. I relate to what you said a lot, because from the moment that I lost my dad to the moment we started work on the film was about a year, a little over a year. And that whole year really was me just trying to get away from it and just move on and move past it and ignore it. So I think the thing I took away, as a whole, was just the fact that there's just incredible benefit in pausing and facing what feels like the unfaceable thing, and that in the midst of pain, the pain itself has a way of being healing. And I think, the passion for the film was just in looking at the world and seeing a world full of people with maybe unhealed broken hearts. And I think that, to me, I look at the route that my life could have taken if I had never been able to acknowledge that, versus the path, the very healing path that's moved me to be able to continue living vibrantly now. And there's not I don't say it like that's like a magic formula or answer, but just that process of pausing and just putting myself in these conversations with people and being forced to just take that in, it actually helped me move forward in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's also, we hope that we live long enough to lose someone we love. I mean, that's a strange thing to say, but that we're lucky enough, and if that experience doesn't become something meaningful and positive in your life, you've really missed an opportunity. And I think you're right in the middle of it, and it's been 10 years of making a film that didn't necessarily need to take 10 years,
right.
But it's been that for you. I'm curious, why do you think, what has changed, and why do you think now is the time?
Yeah, I mean, it's been 10 years. This is actually the first time in that 10 years that I've spoken about the film in a public forum, other than my Kickstarter. That's the most directly I've spoken about it. But, I mean, in terms of, Jonathan and I didn't really, in terms of the impulse that inspired us to create this, we didn't think we were we didn't know the film was going to end up with him dying. We thought we were making a rock and roll documentary. We just found it, so kind of punk rock that he was playing a concert in the cancer ward of Memorial Sloan Kettering. Yeah, we videoed it just instinctively. Why don't I? We had a camera. And then it was only afterwards that we said, wow, maybe there's a film here. That was a big turning point for the project. And then when he did pass away, after accumulating more and more footage of the ups and downs and the hard to believe twists, my film's a short film, but about half of it is shot by the legendary rock and roll documentary filmmaker Albert Maysles, who, in a bizarre twist of turn of events, found out through a friend of a friend that what he was going through and who he was, and came to the hospital and spent a day with him, videotaping him, bonding him. Here we feel like we're making a rock and roll documentary, it's sort of a shared joke between us and between, the people that are close to us. And then, of course, Albert Maysles shows up to shoot the rest of our film. But when he passed away, it was I really just felt like I needed to finish the job that we had started together, that it was our film. I have to speak for both co-directors here today, but it really is our film, and I really feel like we're making it together, so that's something that fuels me in the process. And also, I don't know if this resonates with Andrew or with you guys, but it's also something that in a lot of ways holds me back from finishing it, because I really love this process so much. I don't want it to stop.
That's one of the things that's one for the two of you. When you entered into it, my sense is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there was part of it was really a journalistic story, and a story that was more than about a family loss. But when you got into it, did it unearth that for you? Did it change while you were in the process of making? Because it was such a global story that you were telling, but it was also so personal.
Yeah. What's the question?
The question is, when you went into it, did you know it was going to be part of healing of the process, or was it really about telling a story that's a global story about journalists who risk their lives?
Yeah, I didn't know that it would help me with the healing, and in fact, I think it did help with the healing. I think the way it helped is because Dan, his death made such an impact, and he sort of lived his life like a comet, and he sort of blazed through, and left people so inspired and moved. And so when he died, I was only 19, and I had just trailed along behind this comet, and so I hadn't really sort of achieved anything myself when he died. And I think making that film, instead of being Dan's little sister, I became Amy, and I found my voice. And I realized too that I was going to survive without him, and I had something to say. So I think it was empowering. I don't know if it helped with the grief, because I think that grieving is just time, and then eventually finding happiness.
I think, to Josh's point, I'd say that when you finish the film, that's when it all starts. Because another really the more joyous part. Because in sharing that incredible story, you are giving permission to all the people to celebrate being alive. And we have Dianne with us today, who's the chairman of the Ross Foundation, who was the wonderful woman who was saying it's all about life. It's about life. And so with Josh, bringing that beautiful Johnny to all of us, it kind of reminds us to be really alive. It reminds us to celebrate those who are alive and that life force within us. And I think that the making of the film about Dan and all those incredible journalists then gave me fuel to be able to share that story with people. And it's just like the next part of the adventure is going to be probably the really fun part when you've done the tough stuff.
Yeah.
But I pass it over to you, because Dianne is one of those people who really helps people go through grieving, which is.
But because you and I have had this conversation, but I think also probably Kubler-Ross, a lot of people believe the message was, well, there's a process, and first you go through this, and then you go through this, and it gives it names. But when you watch that film, what was so great for me was it doesn't have a name, and it's very different for everybody. And but that what you and I discussed, that's not different than what her message was.
Right. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, for those of you that don't know, was one of the founders of the hospice movement, back in the early 70s. And it's really interesting because Elizabeth and I worked with Andrew on this film, and it's so nice to see it here. So thank you for the opportunity for us to share this film with you. But the point to Elizabeth, a lot of people thought, On Death and Dying, as you saw, was about the 5 stages. That they're linear, that you go through it in a certain order, and that is rubbish. Even Elizabeth in 1973 said, move on past the 5 stages. But the point was this: she interviewed people, she found that there were some commonalities throughout the interview, and she just said, people go through these things. Like you even heard her say about denying. She was processing, the mom in the film, she was processing this event, but she was in denial of it at the same time, and the bargaining. basically the 5 stages, people go through some of them, all of them, none of them. They're linear, they're linear on paper, but that's it. And what an interesting thing that you didn't see the end of Andrew's film, and I hope you do at some point. Across the top of the chart, of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's own chart, is hope. That we all have embedded within us this tremendous and profound hope. And Andrew, our film attests to that, and I think your lives and the lives of those that you've loved and continue to love is this hope, is the great unifier.
So because this is called The Stories We Tell, Kathy, in your recent book, you touch a little bit on the idea of being able to really communicate with people once they've gone, and in a very direct way. But I think it's interesting when we think about the stories we tell now as we go on, and the stories we choose to tell, the movies we choose to make, the books we choose to write. Do you think that this is another way in which we are, not to say literally, but maybe channeling the spirits in our own ways, that we can talk to have that conversation ongoing through the creation of these stories?
I love that you asked. I always call Dan a noisy spirit. And that sense of Dan's voice in my head saying, God, do more, be more, feel more, love more, give more, create more, has made me a noisy spirit. So whether that's a voice that is actually really that I'm communicating with his alive spirit or a memory of his spirit, doesn't really matter. But that sense of urgency to me, urging me to be more alive, has given me a louder voice, and I've become a very noisy spirit as a result of it. So I think, yes.
You make grieving seem like it's so much fun.
But I think the next step of that is I think then we can also retell these stories in a way that has nothing to do with the person passing. And I think that's what's beautiful what you're doing with Johnny Physical. I don't think it's a story about cancer necessarily. I don't think it's a story about rock and roll, but it's a story about identity. And it's a story about how we see ourselves and how we choose to view experiences, be them hard or difficult or easy or fun. And when at least in a little bit that I've been watching, it's almost as if you can then retell the story as you would want it told, regardless of the facts around it. Do you feel like you have that freedom?
I'm not quite sure I understand the specific, but here's what my reaction is. The first time part of the reason I feel so at home on this panel, the first time I walked into Creative Vision, started hearing about Dan's story, or I knew of Dan's story, but I didn't see the published books, I didn't see the art exhibits, and I was just struck by, I think it's natural because he's such a strong presence in all of these works to really identify with him. It's very easy to, but I immediately identified with these two and how just courageous and artful they were about letting Dan tell his story, kind of, or showing Dan's story as opposed to telling their story of Dan, whatever that meant. So even if it meant that certain parts wouldn't be understood by some people, certain parts wouldn't feel quote unquote universal, certain parts weren't parts that you're supposed to show when you're honoring someone who's passed. So that's to me what I feel a real kinship with. It's just this idea that, and maybe this goes back to your original question to Kathy, because I also just finished her book, and just the way that that making films or remember something, it can be a process. It can feel at times more like channeling than it is like art making in a way. I also inherited hundreds of notebooks and song idea tapes for songs. My brother used to just whenever he had an idea for a song, he would hum it into a tape recorder, or strum lines, strum parts on a guitar and tape that. Or when he was at the hospital and he couldn't pick up a guitar, he would just hum the notes. And when he couldn't reach his tape recorder, he would get his phone and he would call his answering machine at home and hum songs into the home answering machine. So just this incredible wealth of material. And then when you come to that material, and you try to tell that person's story. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's so much more enriching because you feel as if you're in some way. I mean, and it sounds a little wacky, but it feels like you're communioning with them. You're producing it with them, yeah. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll start. I think it was on my mind. I grew up in a certain religious context, and like a lot of people have grown up and sort of explore and kind of, get a little bit outside of that. But what I was interested in was that when we talked to folks, and a lot of folks in that film were from many, many different faith backgrounds.
Right.
Their faith systems, and I can't say this as a generalization, your faith system, what you believe about the afterlife, it is going to impact the grieving process to an extent that's not, I won't go into that. But what I was more impressed with was how much it didn't change.
Yeah.
And, we have a lot of conversations about the things that divide us. And I think part of why we're here this weekend, I was talking to someone last night, and this was totally new to me. He's talking about how the origin of art was that in civilization, one of the first things that a group of people could look at and say, like, we resonate with that together. Like, that's beautiful, So if we're fighting each other, or if we have different views about this, that, and the other, that we can look at and resonate with. Fast forward all the way from that till now, for me, it's like we have found all these ways to create things to argue about or disagree about with faith or afterlife or certainty or uncertainty, when in reality, you're right, we are still here. And whatever I believe about what's coming then, there's right now. And I guess for me, the learning was just that there's a lot we have in common around what it means to love someone, what it means to lose someone. And I'm a big fan, just in our world, of moments that we can say, that as a human being, doesn't matter where you're from or what you believe in or what we disagree on, like, man, we at our just base core come into this world, we have this life that we live, and then we leave this world. And there's a ton of commonality there. So I guess the film for me was more focusing on the commonality than it was some of the differences.
And to answer just quickly about your question specifically, I think what you were asking, if I understood it correctly, was about the importance of religion or spirituality as a part of the grieving process, right? So this is like my genre. So I'll address it quickly. Briefly, we found that almost every dying patient asked themselves questions that have to do with their spiritual core more than their religious belief system. Mm-hmm. We're all spiritual beings, and every dying patient at some point, even if they come full circle and say, I still don't believe. Mm-hmm. Okay. But they go through that questioning and that reckoning process. And then when they lose someone, they go through that process again about questioning their spiritual core, which also encompasses religious belief systems. Some people shift. They just say, no more. I want to be this, or I'm more that. And I want to echo what Andrew said too about loss as a great unifier. It is the thing that unites us. And I think I lost my son. The fact that I'm here doing this work all these years later is pretty crazy and cool. But at the same time, you all have all lost people. And I think when we start seeing, right, together, and we look at people through their losses and their shared experiences, it really is an opportunity. So specifically, not so much religion, yes, absolutely, spiritual core.
I really love that. For me, right within 12 minutes, and I can really calculate it, after Dan was killed, I said, I have to make a film. I have to give value to the lives, because Dan was killed with 3 other young journalists. And there were 72 Somalis who were killed on that day and 200 people wounded. And I learned more facts later. But within 12 minutes, I, as a filmmaker and a person who believes in the power of media to be transformative, I knew what I had to do. And that transformational process is what has given my life tremendous purpose and meaning. And as Amy said, quite separate. The grieving went on. I mean, we did a book on grieving. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. But the fact that I had something that I knew I had to do meant that I had to get up in the morning and I had to live for Amy and I had to do what I knew I had to do. And I'm wondering, I love the idea of giving a nation some sort of project that is the, like in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation, which is a form of healing, you know, the horrors of what went on there. But if there was a national project of, look, we're gonna, well, you know, 9/11, they rebuild, whatever, but something that is symbolic of that sense of going through a process of healing and reconciliation, because I'm sure that, you know, otherwise you're in the cycle of revenge and anger and hatred. Amy, do you have something?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know that Khalil Gibran poem, which is something to the effect of the deeper you carve out that cavern of pain, the more capacity you have to fill it up with joy. And I think we all, and everyone who's lost something, feel that when you've been through hell, when you've been through the fire, when you're on the other side, life is so much sweeter and so much more beautiful because you appreciate it so much more. And you appreciate the people around you so much more. My husband's probably, if he was here, he'd be laughing at me because I just ran home and yelled at him for feeding the kids Taco Bell. But I try. And things like this film, 9/11, Liberia, the Philippines, pulls into sharper focus what's important and how we need to live because we're all dying. But I didn't answer your question.
I think it's a great question for this particular group because each of them created something that was going to tell the story after the experience. So I don't know what the answer is, but there is something about that creative process that they're doing as an individual or you did together that might be able to be done as a society, as small, large, whether it's creating memorials, whether it's what's the story we're going to tell going forward. I don't know the answer, but there's something in my mind where I look at the way these three handle it that's a lesson to us somehow.
We need inspiration. And
It's
the word
inspiration, yeah.
inspiration means to breathe in. And when we see those people who have been able to go through and come out the other end, I was inspired by Amy Beale's parents. And Amy Beale's was killed 2 months before or after Dianne, brutally murdered in a South African township. Her parents, who were from Newport Beach, Republicans, oh my God. I know, I said really, these have never been to South Africa in their lives. And they went to South Africa and they created a community center on the site where their daughter was killed, and they hired the guy who had killed her, having gone through the Truth and Reconciliation process, to be one of the bakers.
No.
And that has been one of the most profound inspirations to me. And when you see that, you think, okay, what can I do? And right now, I really, really want to do something in Somalia. I'm really determined. We've been invited to Somalia next July. But it's like in Liberia, to have role models who are not into the cycle of revenge, but who are, moving us forward. So let's talk about it, Cash. Let's go do something.
Yeah, and I wanted to echo that, and it's really important because in the absence of valuable, inspirational information, it's very easy to go that other path. And we've seen that, and we will continue to see that. I think here in the States, we have, every week I'm approached, I wrote a book, would you like to hire me as a speaker? And it's, the thing is that there are so many people that grieve silently, that take that other route, that need help and guidance. And I think, you've got a great opportunity here to create a model and to create information that at least addresses the unique needs of each and every person. That grief is a process, not an event. And I want to, just if we can help out too through the foundation, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation or whatever, we're happy to collaborate.
For those who haven't seen it, you can't go wrong where you end up today, but as a follow-up to this conversation about what are models that can work in nations, there's a beautiful film playing today. If you don't see it today, see it another day, Rising from Ashes. It's about the creation of the Rwandan cycling team, but it's about much more about human redemption and how do you model the wheels of change, no pun intended. But before we totally move on, I know you have another film you're working on right now. Would you just tell us 2 minutes about that so that we know to keep an eye out for it and how we can help with that film? Because you're one of our creative activists and you're still going, this film is behind you, but we want to support the next one too.
Yeah, the new film that I'm working on is called The True Cost. And we showed a little trailer this morning that some of you guys might have seen, but it's about the impact of the global clothing industry on people and the planet. And it's funny, as I was just thinking about this before you asked that, your comment about the space you carve out for pain. The day we were finishing up post on this film, I was in Starbucks getting coffee, and I looked down at the New York Times, and there was this cover photo of these two boys standing in front of this huge wall of missing person signs. And something about it just broke my heart. And I'm not the kind of person that typically lets every news story just do that to you. And I went on to read about the factory collapse in Rana Plaza that happened just the day before. And so I think it's interesting. It's a film that we're going to be making in more than 10 countries around the world, and it's really exciting, and you can keep an eye out for it. But I think to finish this conversation, it's just interesting that I don't know if I hadn't made this film, if I hadn't paused and allowed myself to feel the impact of the loss, if I would have been in a place ready, with my heart not covered up, but with my heart exposed, to take in something that now that we start working on, I feel like was kind of calling out to me somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess wherever you are, whether you lost someone just a few days ago or if it's been decades, I think it's not just narcissistic. There's actually true meaning and power in reflecting and actually choosing to do more than just step over that, because there might be the most meaningful work of your life waiting for you right in response, right following that.
Beautiful. No better way to end. Thank you.